I am Adrian, and I never thought a quiet Tuesday evening would change my life forever. The rain had just stopped, leaving the city streets slick with reflections of neon signs and car headlights. I was sitting in the back of my black SUV, scrolling through endless messages about deals, meetings, and numbers. My life had become a blur of wealth and power, of boardrooms and contracts, of everything money could buy. And yet, I didn't feel alive anymore. Billionaire. That was what the world called me. But tonight, something was about to happen that would make me forget all the titles, the money, the fame. And remember, I was once just a boy in an ordinary classroom. I told my driver to stop at a small diner on the corner. It wasn't the kind of place someone like me usually walked into. My business partners preferred five-star restaurants with private rooms and menus in French. But I was tired of fake smiles and forced conversations. I just wanted a cup of coffee. Somewhere simple. Somewhere quiet. The bell over the door jingled when I stepped inside. The warm air smelled like fresh bread and coffee beans. A few truck drivers sat by the window. A couple in the corner was laughing softly, and behind the counter, wiping down a table, was a waitress. For a moment, I couldn't move. My heart stopped, then kicked back to life so hard it almost hurt, because I knew that face. It had been more than 10 years, but I would have recognized her anywhere. Lena. Back in school, she was the girl who always sat by the window, sketching in her notebook when the teacher wasn't looking. She was smart, sharp, funny in a way that sneaked up on you. Everyone liked her, even though she never tried to be popular. And me? I was the kid with second-hand shoes and a backpack held together with tape. I didn't have much, but I had dreams. Big ones. We were friends once. Real friends. Then life happened. My family moved, college came, the hustle started, and somehow I never saw her again. Until tonight. She hadn't noticed me yet. Her hair was pulled back and there were tired circles under her eyes. The kind you only get from working too hard for too long. She was carrying 2 plates to a table, smiling politely at the customers, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached the eyes. Something twisted in my chest. What happened to her? The last time I saw Lena, she was talking about studying art, traveling the world, maybe opening a little gallery by the sea. And now she was here, in this small diner at the edge of the city, wearing a faded apron with a name tag that looked older than she was. I didn't walk up to her right away. I just stood there for a second, watching, my mind racing through 1,000 questions. Should I say something? Would she even remember me? Or would she look at me the way strangers look at each other? Polite, distant, empty? Finally, I sat at the counter. She turned toward me with her notepad in hand, and for a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Her eyes widened. Adrian? Her voice cracked just a little when she said my name. I smiled. Hey, Lena, it's been a while. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there like her brain was catching up to what her eyes were seeing. Then she gave a small, shocked laugh. A while? Adrian, it's been years. What are you even doing here? I could have told her about the company I built, the skyscraper with my name on it, the magazines that called me the youngest billionaire in the country. But the words felt heavy on my tongue. None of that mattered right now. Just wanted some coffee, I said lightly. Didn't expect to find an old friend behind the counter. She shook her head, still looking at me like I had walked out of a photograph from another life. Yeah, me neither. But there was something in her voice. Something tired. Something she was hiding behind that small smile. I wanted to ask her a million things. What happened after school? Why was she here? Was she okay? But the words wouldn't come out, because sometimes the hardest thing isn't talking to a stranger, it's talking to someone who used to know you before the world changed everything. She poured me a cup of coffee, set it in front of me, and for a moment, our hands almost touched. On the house, she said softly. I didn't like the way that sounded, like she was used to giving things away because life never gave much back. As I sipped the coffee, I kept watching her. the way she moved, the way she smiled at customers even when they didn't look at her twice. And I made a decision right then, in that small diner with the peeling wallpaper and flickering lights. I was going to change her life. She had no idea yet. But by the time this night was over, Lena's world would never be the same again, and neither would mine, because sometimes the past doesn't just come back to visit. Sometimes it comes back with a storm, and this storm was only getting started. Lena kept moving around the diner, taking orders, refilling cups, carrying plates like she had done this 1,000 times before. Maybe she had, but there was something about the way she avoided looking at me for too long that told me she was trying to hide whatever was really going on in her life. I sat there, watching her, the coffee growing cold in my cup. Every now and then she would glance at me, like she was still trying to believe I was real. The boy she used to talk to during lunch breaks, the one who once shared cheap sandwiches with her on the school steps, was now sitting here in a $1,000 suit, silent, like he didn't know how to start over. I remembered the last time I saw her. It was after our final exams. She had this spark in her eyes, talking about scholarships, art schools, dreams bigger than the town we grew up in. I was leaving too, chasing a future I could barely imagine. We promised to keep in touch. We didn't. Life has a way of pulling people in different directions until one day, you look up and realize you don't even know where the other person ended up. Now, here she was, taking cash from a man at the counter, smiling politely but quickly, like she couldn't afford to waste time on anything unnecessary. When the rush slowed down, she walked over. "So," she said, leaning slightly on the counter, "what are you doing these days? I haven't seen you since—" Wow, I don't even remember. I looked at her for a long moment. There was no easy way to answer that. "I run a few businesses," I said vaguely. She laughed softly. "You always wanted to do something big, I remember." There was warmth in her voice, but also something else, something like sadness. "What about you?" I asked carefully. Her smile faded a little. "Oh, just working, paying bills, nothing exciting." I wanted to ask more, but she was called over by another customer. As she walked away, I felt this strange mix of anger and confusion. How could someone so full of life, someone who once talked about painting cities and traveling across oceans, end up like this? I stayed long after my coffee was gone, watching her work, catching small pieces of conversations she had with customers. Most of them didn't even look at her properly. To them, she was just a waitress. To me, she was someone who used to dream out loud. When the diner finally quieted down, I asked, "When do you finish?" She looked surprised. "Why?" "Maybe we could talk, catch up. It's been a long time." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I get off in 30 minutes. So I waited. And while I waited, I thought about everything money had given me. Power, respect, a life people envied. But right now, all I wanted was to know what had happened to the girl who once believed she could do anything. When she finally took off her apron and came over, it was raining again outside. We stepped into the wet streets, the city glowing under streetlights. "Do you live nearby?" I asked. She nodded. "Small apartment. It's nothing fancy." The way she said it made me feel something tighten in my chest. "Lena," I said slowly, "what happened after school? I mean, you were going to study art, right?" She looked down at the sidewalk, her hands in her jacket pockets. "Yeah, that was the plan." "But," she laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Life happened, Adrian. My mom got sick. Money was tight. College wasn't an option anymore. I started working. One job turned into another. And, well, here we are." I didn't know what to say. The girl who once painted sunsets in the margins of her notebooks was now walking beside me in the rain, talking like all those dreams belonged to someone else. "Do you still paint?" I asked finally. She shook her head. "Haven't in years. Who has time for that?" I stopped walking. "Lena, you were incredible. I remember your drawings. You could have done so much." She looked at me, and for a moment there was something sharp in her eyes. Dreams don't pay rent, Adrian. Life isn't like it was in school. You learn to let things go. I didn't believe that. Not for a second. But I could see she did. We reached her building. It was old, with cracked walls and flickering lights in the hallway. She turned to me. "Thanks for walking me back. It was nice to see you again." I didn't want the night to end like this. "Lena," I said, "can I call you? Maybe have dinner sometime. Talk properly." She hesitated again, like she wasn't sure if letting me back into her life was a good idea. Finally, she nodded. "Sure, why not?" I saved her number, watching as she disappeared into the building. As I walked back to my car, my mind was already spinning. I had more money than I could ever spend, more connections than most people could dream of. And yet, tonight, for the first time in years, none of that felt important, because all I could think about was Lena, and the feeling that she was carrying a story she wasn't telling me. Something was wrong. I could feel it, and I was going to find out what it was. But I had no idea then just how deep this was going to go. No idea that pulling one thread from her life would unravel things neither of us saw coming, and no idea that the night I walked into that diner was the start of something I couldn't control. Not with all the money in the world. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Meetings, calls, contracts, it all felt like noise in the background. My assistant kept handing me files, asking for signatures, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I kept thinking about Lena, about the way she smiled like she didn't want to be seen too closely, about the apartment with the peeling paint, about the way she said she hadn't painted in years, like that part of her had died quietly when no one was watching. I told myself it wasn't my problem. People lose dreams all the time. Life isn't fair. I had built my empire by focusing on the future, not the past. But the truth was, something about Lena bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. By lunchtime, I found myself canceling the rest of my day. My driver gave me a look when I told him to head back toward the diner, but he didn't say anything. The diner was quieter this time. Lena wasn't there yet, but another waitress told me she worked evenings. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and waited. When she finally walked in, she looked surprised to see me. "Adrian, you're back?" "Couldn't stay away," I said lightly, though there was more truth in it than I wanted to admit. She tied on her apron, glancing at me. "Busy man like you doesn't have better places to be." "Not really," I said. "Besides, the coffee's good." She smirked, but there was still that distance in her eyes, like she didn't fully trust whatever this was. As she worked, I watched closely. She seemed tired, not just the kind of tired you fix with sleep, but the kind that settles into your bones, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. When she finally had a break, I asked her, "Lena, are you okay?" "Really?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "I'm fine, just life, you know? It's not easy." Her voice cracked slightly on the last part, like she hadn't meant to let that slip. I wanted to push, but before I could, the diner door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, with rough features and a stare that swept the room like he owned it. The moment Lena saw him, her whole body stiffened. He walked straight to the counter, eyes landing on her. "You're late on rent," he said flatly, ignoring everyone else. I watched Lena's face pale. "I told you, I just need a little more time." "You've been saying that for 2 months," he snapped. "End of the week, or you're out." Then he turned and left as quickly as he came. Lena stood there for a moment, frozen, then forced herself back into motion like nothing had happened. But I saw her hands shaking as she poured coffee for another customer. I didn't say anything right away, but inside, something was shifting. That night, after she finished her shift, I offered her a ride home. She refused at first, but when the rain started again, she gave in. As we drove, she stared out the window, quiet. Finally, she said, "I didn't want you to see that today." "Who was he?" "My landlord," she said softly. "The rent's gone up, and Well, I'm behind. Why didn't you tell me? She turned sharply toward me. Because it's not your problem, Adrian. I'm fine. I just need to figure things out. But she didn't sound fine. I wanted to tell her I could write a check and solve it all in 5 seconds. But something about the way she held herself back made me stop. Instead, I asked, "Do you have anyone to help you? Family?" She shook her head. "It's just me now." Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the rain. When we pulled up to her building, she hesitated before getting out. "Thanks for the ride. Lena," I said carefully, "let me help." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why? We haven't seen each other in years. Why do you care now?" I didn't have an answer that would make sense to her, or to me. "Maybe I should have cared sooner," I said finally. She gave a small, sad smile. "Good night, Adrian." And just like that, she was gone again. But now the pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't like. Lena was drowning, and no one seemed to notice. Over the next few days, I started digging quietly. About her landlord, about the diner, about everything she wasn't telling me. Money bought information quickly, and what I learned made my jaw tighten. The landlord had a history, a bad one. Complaints from tenants, lawsuits, people mysteriously losing their apartments when they fell behind, only for the buildings to be sold weeks later for huge profits. And Lena's diner? It wasn't doing well. Business had been slowing for months. If it closed, she'd lose her job on top of everything else. It felt like watching a storm roll in, one dark cloud at a time. But the strangest thing was, the deeper I looked, the more it felt like none of this was random. Like someone wanted her cornered. I couldn't prove it yet, but my instincts told me this was bigger than unpaid rent or a struggling diner. And I was going to find out what it was. Because Lena might have given up on her dreams. But I wasn't about to give up on her, and whoever was behind this, they had no idea what kind of fight was coming. Days kept passing, but the feeling in my chest only got heavier. I couldn't shake the image of Lena standing in that rain, trying to hold her life together while everything around her was falling apart. I had built companies worth billions, crushed competitors, survived markets crashing and deals falling apart. Yet watching her face when that landlord walked in felt worse than any boardroom battle I'd ever fought. I kept visiting the diner, sometimes late at night when the city had quieted down. At first, she seemed unsure why I kept showing up, but slowly she stopped asking. We talked more, about small things, school memories, teachers we hated, the stupid jokes we used to laugh at. But there were things she didn't talk about. Her eyes gave away pieces she tried to hide, like sleepless nights or rent notices piling up somewhere in that apartment. One evening, I saw a bruise on her arm when she reached for a coffee pot. She tried to pull her sleeve down quickly, but I caught it. "Lena." "What happened?" "Nothing," she said too fast, brushing it off. "Just slipped carrying a box." But the way she avoided my eyes told me it wasn't the truth. And that was the moment I knew something bigger was happening. I had my assistant dig deeper into the landlord. What he found made my blood run cold. The man wasn't just pushing tenants out for profit. He had ties to people who didn't play by the rules. Debt collectors, shady property deals, businesses that disappeared overnight after being acquired through pressure no one could prove in court. And Lena? She was 2 months behind on rent in a building owned by someone like that. The diner was barely surviving, too. I overheard the owner one night on the phone, voice low and tense, talking about loans coming due. If that place closed, Lena would lose the only steady paycheck she had. It felt like every part of her life was being pushed toward the edge at the same time. Then, one rainy night, everything changed. I stopped by the diner just before closing. The streets outside were empty, slick with rain under the glow of the street lamps. Inside, Lena was cleaning tables, but she wasn't alone. The landlord was there, standing by the counter, talking to her in a low voice. His tone wasn't angry. It was worse, calm, cold, like someone explaining a deal she had no choice but to take. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught words like deadline and consequences. Lena stood stiff, arms crossed, chin raised like she was forcing herself not to look scared. When he left, he passed by me without even glancing my way. I walked inside. What did he want? Nothing, she said quickly, grabbing a rag like the conversation was over. Lena. She froze, shoulders tense. For a second, I thought she might tell me, but then she shook her head. It doesn't matter, I'll figure it out. But I knew she wouldn't. Not alone. That night, I sat in my car outside her building long after she went inside. I watched the lights go out in her apartment window, and I made a decision. If the landlord wanted to play games, I'd play harder. I had people start watching him. His calls, his deals, his late-night meetings in parking lots with men who didn't want their names known. And the deeper we looked, the worse it got. He wasn't just a landlord. He was part of something bigger, buying up buildings in neighborhoods where rents were being pushed higher and higher, forcing people out until only those connected to him could afford to stay. And Lena was stuck right in the middle of it. One night, I went back to the diner. It was pouring rain, thunder shaking the windows. Lena was there, pale and quiet, like she hadn't slept in days. Before I could ask anything, a car pulled up outside. 2 men in dark coats came in, shaking off the rain. They weren't here for food. Their eyes went straight to Lena. "Your boss around?" one asked the cashier casually, but there was nothing casual about the way they scanned the room. Lena froze. I didn't like the feeling in the air. The owner came out from the back, wiping his hands. One of the men leaned in close, speaking low enough I couldn't hear. The owner's face drained of color. The men left without ordering a thing. Lena tried to act like nothing happened, but her hands were trembling when she carried coffee to a table. After closing, I offered her another ride. This time, she didn't argue. Halfway to her apartment, she whispered, "Adrian, I think they're going to shut the diner down. And if that happens, I don't know what I'll do." There it was, the fear she had been hiding for weeks. But I didn't tell her what I already knew, that the landlord wasn't just after the building. He was after control. And the people around him weren't just businessmen. This was bigger, darker, and it was closing in fast. The next day, I got a call from one of my people watching the landlord. "Something's happening tonight," he said. "He's meeting with a buyer. Big deal. And guess which building's at the top of the list?" I didn't have to guess. Lena's. Everything was about to crash down at once. Her apartment, her job, maybe more. And as the storm clouds rolled over the city that evening, I knew one thing for sure. Before the night was over, someone was going to push too far. And when they did, everything would break. The rain came heavier that night, drumming against the windshield as I sat in the car watching the building across the street. My contact had been right. The landlord was inside, meeting someone in a black SUV that had pulled up half an hour ago. I couldn't see faces through the tinted windows, but I knew the kind of people who showed up in cars like that. The kind who didn't leave paper trails. I was about to step out when my phone buzzed. It was Lena. "Adrian," she said, her voice trembling. "I just got a notice. They're cutting power to the diner tomorrow. The owner said he can't fight it anymore. He's selling. I'm going to lose my job." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Where are you now?" "Home." "Lock your door," I said quickly. "I'm coming over." But before I could move, another car pulled up behind the SUV. 2 men stepped out, one carrying a folder thick with documents. They headed inside with the landlord like this was just business as usual. Except it wasn't. Because when my contact called me back 5 minutes later, his words froze me in place. "Adrian, you're not going to believe this. That buyer, he's not just after the diner or her building. He's after the whole block. And guess who's backing him?" "Who?" He hesitated, like even saying it out loud felt dangerous. "Your old rival, the one you beat out on that tech deal last year. He's funding this whole thing through shell companies. Looks like he wants payback." I sat there stunned, rain sliding down the windshield. This wasn't just about Lena anymore. This was about me, about revenge. And suddenly, it all made sense. The timing, the pressure, the way everything around her was collapsing at once. She was caught in the middle of a game she didn't even know existed. A game meant to hit me where I wouldn't see it coming. My rival had money, connections, and clearly no problem tearing down an entire neighborhood if it meant watching me burn. And Lena, she was just collateral damage. The thought made something in me snap. I drove straight to her apartment. She looked scared when she opened the door, like she hadn't slept. "Adrian, what's going on? Why are they doing this?" I couldn't tell her everything yet, not until I had proof. "Listen to me," I said carefully. "You need to pack a bag. Just for a few days. Stay somewhere safe." She shook her head. "I can't just run away. This is my home, my job." "Lena," I interrupted, "they're not playing fair. This isn't just about rent anymore. There's more happening here than you realize." She stared at me, confusion and fear mixing in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" But before I could answer, headlights swept across the window. A car slowed in front of her building, stopping for just a second before driving on. She noticed it too. "Adrian," she whispered, "I've seen that car before." The tension in the room tightened like a wire about to snap. This wasn't random. They were watching her now. Maybe watching me too. I left 2 of my security people outside her building that night, disguised as neighbors sitting in a parked car. If anyone came back, I wanted to know. But deep down, I already knew this was spinning out of control. Because the next morning, my office got hit. Regulators, inspectors, anonymous complaints about everything from taxes to building codes. All timed perfectly. While I was trying to protect Lena, someone was moving against me too. Fast and hard. It wasn't just business rivalry anymore. This was personal. A message. They wanted me distracted, chasing shadows, while they closed in on everything else. And if they thought threatening Lena would make me back down, they had no idea what was coming for them. The next 48 hours moved like a storm with no warning. The landlord pushed harder, the diner owner packed up papers for a sale he didn't want to make, and Lena kept trying to act like everything wasn't falling apart. But she couldn't hide the fear anymore. It was in her voice when she talked. It was in the way she jumped whenever a car slowed near the curb. I put everything else on hold. My company, my meetings, my entire empire could wait. Because this wasn't about business anymore. Someone had chosen Lena's life as their battleground, and I wasn't going to let her be destroyed just to get to me. That evening, my team tracked the rival and the landlord to a warehouse near the docks, a place where deals happened far from boardrooms and lawyers. It was raining again, thunder rolling low like the sky itself knew something was about to break. I told Lena to stay home, but she refused. "This is my life, Adrian," she said quietly. "I need to see how it ends." So she came with me. We arrived just as the rival stepped out of a black car surrounded by men who didn't look like businessmen. The landlord was there too, holding a folder stuffed with contracts. They were laughing, shaking hands like everything was already theirs. I walked in with 2 of my security men. The rival's smile faded when he saw me. "Adrian," he said smoothly, "didn't expect you here tonight." "Cut the act," I snapped. "This was never about the buildings. It was about me." He shrugged like it didn't matter. "You took deals from me, investors, clients. Call this payback." I glanced at the contracts on the table, and you dragged her into it. He barely looked at Lena. "Collateral damage, nothing personal." That was it. That was the moment something in me hardened. I threw a thick folder onto the table. "You should have done your homework. While you were busy playing landlord games, I bought out half the debt on this block last week. Every loan, every lien, including this building." The landlord's face went pale. He grabbed the papers, flipping through them like he didn't believe it. The rival frowned. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said coldly. "One signature, and I own everything you think you're stealing tonight." The room went tense. Rain hammered the roof. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the rival smiled slowly. "Fine. Take the buildings. But this isn't over." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, one of my men handed me another document, something I hadn't seen until that moment. It was a copy of the diner's original loan papers. And on the last page, buried in the fine print, was a signature I recognized instantly. Lena's. My chest tightened. "Lena, what is this?" She froze, eyes wide. "Adrian, I can explain." The rival turned back, smiling like the twist belonged to him. "She didn't tell you? That loan the diner owner took out years ago. She co-signed it, which means when it defaulted she was liable. We didn't need the building to push her under. We already owned her debt." I looked at Lena, and for the first time she looked guilty. "I signed it to help the owner," she whispered. "He promised it was safe. I didn't know they sold the debt to him." The rival grinned. "Smart move, right? Either you lose your empire fighting me, or you save her and admit I beat you." I stared at him, then at Lena, then back at the papers, and slowly I smiled. "Check the date," I said quietly. He frowned, flipping through the document. "Yesterday," I said, "I paid off every loan tied to her name, including this one. You own nothing now." The rival's face changed then. The calm confidence cracked. The landlord cursed under his breath. And Lena just stood there, staring at me like she didn't understand what had just happened. It was over. The contracts were worthless. The buildings, the diner, her apartment, safe. My rival had nothing left to threaten us with. But as he left, soaked in rain and rage, he paused at the door. "This isn't the last move, Adrian. You've won today, not the war." And for a second, I believed him. Because outside, another car had been watching. Not his, not the landlord's, someone else entirely, someone who didn't move when the rival's men drove off. And as its headlights cut through the rain, I felt it. This wasn't the end at all. It was the beginning of something bigger. Rain kept falling long after everyone left that warehouse, like the sky wasn't ready to let the night end. I stood there with Lena, watching the taillights disappear into the dark, feeling like the ground under us had finally stopped shaking, but only barely. The rival was gone, the landlord beaten, the contracts worthless, yet that car waiting outside the whole time. That was something else. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Lena just wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of everything she'd been through heavy in her eyes. She looked at me finally. "It's over, right?" she asked softly, almost like she didn't want to believe it. I wanted to tell her yes, to say we'd won, that the storm had passed, but that car in the rain, the one that hadn't moved, kept flashing in my mind. Someone had been watching all of this, and it wasn't over. When we got back to her apartment, my security team stayed nearby, keeping an eye on everything. I didn't want her alone. Not yet. She made tea in that small kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she set the mugs on the table. "Adrian," she said, breaking the silence, "why did you do all this? You could have just walked away." I looked at her across the table. "Because you were my friend. Because you didn't deserve any of this. And because I should have been there a long time ago." She didn't say anything for a while. Then she nodded slowly, like she finally believed me. The next few days moved fast. My lawyers locked everything down legally so the rival couldn't come back through some loophole. The landlord vanished, probably left the city after realizing he had bigger problems now. The diner owner cried when I handed him papers showing the place was safe and debt-free. Lena kept looking at me like she didn't know how to thank me, but even as things settled, that car never left my mind. 2 nights later, I got my answer. My security team found it again, parked near one of my office buildings. The plates led to a private investigator. Someone had hired him to watch Lena months before any of this started. When we pulled the investigator in to talk, he cracked faster than I expected. It wasn't the rival who hired him. It was someone else entirely. someone who knew both me and Lena from years ago. The name hit like a punch, an old business partner I hadn't spoken to in almost a decade. Back then, we started with nothing, building our first company together. But when the money came in, he wanted shortcuts, deals with people I didn't trust. I walked away, started fresh. He disappeared overseas with what was left of the first company's money. And now, he was back. Through shell companies, hidden accounts, fake names, he had been behind the loans, the diner's debts, even the landlord's sudden pressure. My rival had just been a distraction, someone he used to make the whole thing look like revenge. But the real plan? It was always bigger. He wanted my empire piece by piece, and somehow he knew Lena would be the way to get to me. I didn't tell her right away. She'd had enough to carry. Instead, I set a trap. If he wanted my empire, I'd let him think he was winning. We leaked false reports about one of my companies losing investors, about me pulling back after the warehouse incident. Just enough bait to make him think I was vulnerable. It worked. Within a week, he showed his hand, sending people to quietly buy stock in one of my smaller firms through cut-out names, thinking I wouldn't see the pattern. But we traced it straight back to him. The night we confronted him, it wasn't in a boardroom. It was in the same warehouse where all this started. He walked in with that same grin I remembered from years ago, the kind that used to make investors believe anything he said. "Adrian," he said smoothly, "heard you've been having trouble lately." I tossed the stack of evidence on the table. Bank records, shell company ties, proof of every move he'd made. "It's over," I told him. "I know everything." For the first time, his smile cracked. He tried to talk his way out, to spin the story like he always did, but it was too late. My lawyers, the authorities, they had it all now. When he finally left in handcuffs, Lena stood beside me, silent. "It's done," I said quietly. She looked at me for a long moment before whispering, "For real this time?" "For real," I said. After that, life didn't snap back to normal overnight. It never does. The diner needed repairs, the neighborhood needed rebuilding after months of fear and pressure. I invested in the block, turning those buildings into homes people could actually afford, giving the diner a full renovation so it could stay open for years. Lena kept working there for a while, but I noticed something changing. One evening, I found her sitting by the window after closing, sketchbook in hand. She hadn't touched one in years, but now page after page filled with the kind of drawings I remembered from school, dreams in pencil and ink. "You're painting again," I said softly. She smiled, a real one this time. "Guess I finally have something worth painting." Months later, she opened a small art studio 2 blocks from the diner. Kids came after school to learn. Local artists displayed their work. It wasn't the gallery by the sea she once dreamed about, but it was hers. Sometimes I'd stop by, watching her teach a group of kids how to hold a brush or mix colors. She looked alive in a way she hadn't when I first walked into that diner on a rainy night. One evening, as the sun set over the city, she came to sit beside me outside the studio. "Do you ever think," she said, "about how one night changed everything?" I nodded. "All the time." Because it had. The rival, the landlord, the old partner, all of them were gone now, pieces of a story that had started with a simple cup of coffee and a girl I used to know from school. But Lena's life was different now. Mine too, in ways I didn't expect. Money could rebuild buildings, buy companies, win battles in court. But it couldn't give back the years she lost or erase the nights she went to bed wondering if she'd have a home the next week. What it could do, though, was make sure she never had to feel that way again. As the streetlights flickered on, kids laughing as they ran out of the studio with paint on their hands, Lena looked at me. "Thank you," she said simply. I shook my head. "You did this, Lena. I just cleared the path." She smiled, closing the sketchbook on her lap. For the first time in a long time, the city felt quiet. No cars watching from the dark, no contracts threatening to take everything. Just the sound of rain starting again in the distance and the glow of the studio lights spilling onto the sidewalk. It was over. Not with a storm, not with another fight, just with a kind of peace neither of us had felt in years. And as the rain came down soft and steady, I realized that sometimes the biggest battles don't end with noise. They end with a door opening to something new, something better. And for both of us, this was finally that door.